on Ramos from GLAAD, and guess what? We have got a brand new reimagined version of Queer as Folk, which will be available starting June 9th on Peacock. And today I'm so excited to be chatting with the cast and the creative team. First up, let's say hello to the creator, the writer, the executive producer, and the director, Stephen Dunn. Next, we have the executive producer and writer, Jaclyn Moore. Now to the cast, we have Devin Way, who plays Brody. Finn Argus plays Mingus. Jesse James Keitel plays Ruthie. CG plays Cher. Johnny Sibley plays Noah, and Ryan O'Connell plays Julian. I would love to hear from you, Stephen, just what that original series meant to you.
I mean, I used to watch it in my basement with the volume turned down super low, with the last channel button ready to flip back to YTV, and I was watching it with bated breath. It was my sexual awakening. It was my first exposure to a queer community. When I saw the British series, it was just so punk. It was vibrant. These characters just leapt off the screen, and it's a very meaningful experience. Seeing that show at such a young age, and really, I think it changed the landscape of television, of queer storytelling.
Completely agree. I also have similar stories about hiding watching it, being so afraid if someone saw me watching it. Jaclyn, if I may jump to you, I think thinking about the original version, Queer as Folk, as good as it was, this version is groundbreaking. It's way more inclusive. We are hearing important stories about trans people, about non-binary people. Tell me a little bit about that process and the intention and what it means to you to be a part of telling these stories.
Yeah, it means everything, right? So much of what we do as creative people and artists is want to express ourselves, and especially as trans people and queer people, we don't always get the opportunities that other groups do. And so to have this opportunity to just speak very honestly and truthfully, the original versions of the show were wonderful and groundbreaking for their time, but what queerness means in 2022 is very different than what queerness meant publicly and in 1999, 2000. And so getting to tell stories that are, maybe a little more honest and a little more inclusive, and also speak to real life experiences, which now, obviously, in our current climate where the actual lives that are being experienced are under threat, to kind of be loud and defiant is itself sort of the story of queerness.
Let's jump to the cast. Devin, aka Brody. He is smart, handsome, all the good things. This show does such a great job about showing characters that are flawed, that are messy, that are just like so many of us. How would you describe Brody, and what would you say are some of his strengths and maybe some of his weaknesses?
To me, he's very dear to my heart because as someone who was also adopted, like Brody, I understand what it's like to grow up and feel like love is conditional. And so I think that a lot of Brody's behaviors, in terms of him running away in the very first episode, you see him coming back to his home, is just, it all stems from feeling like people are going to leave him, And so I think that's something that a lot of us can connect with, is the idea of being abandoned. And what I love so much about the show and how Jaclyn and Stephen wrote it is that Brody, it's someone fighting his instincts to run.
We got to go to Brody's BFF, Ruthie, played by Jesse James Keitel. Jesse, this show is so great for so many reasons, but one of the things that I love is that it really brings in a lot of hope and a lot of humor into that. And I think that's so important when we're, showcasing these queer storylines, to show that hope and the humor. Tell me a little bit about, what it was like for you and, relating to Ruthie in that way.
One, be unapologetically trans on television, which is definitely a testament to the storytelling and the writing and the direction. We got to really thrive in our own skin. And I think for me personally, part of that is my own sense of humor, which the writers and Ryan and Stephen and Jaclyn, I think they really tapped into all of us as actors.
Finn, if I may come to you, what I also love that this show does such a great job of including is the world of drag and what that means for so many queer people. I think about other shows that are on now and just how drag is on this amazing wave of popularity. But, you know, for queer people, it's been a part of our lives for so long. Tell me about Mingus and the drag performances that we're going to get to see your character do in the series.
Getting to play Mingus was already a gift. You know, they're a really self-assured queer person at such a young age, which is an exciting thing, and there are a lot of pieces of me that are within Mingus, but I for sure wasn't as explicitly queer when I was their age. So it was cool to embody that type of character, and I feel like that represents this new wave of youthful queerness that's much more unabashed and loud and proud. And a part of that is getting into drag. And, you know, I've seen an influx of young people getting into the drag scene. And the drag scene is changing as well. You know, it's not so cut and dry. It's not so binary. It's all just about gender expansiveness. And I had the opportunity to really lean into that with Mingus. And their drag is unusual, it's unique, and it's very them.
Finn, did you like call up any drag superstars and get advice or anything like that before you did this?
Yeah, no, for sure. I just like had RuPaul on speed dial and like, no, I mean, I think I was really lucky to have gotten involved in the drag scene in New Orleans pretty early on. And I would say that was my first introduction into the drag world, period, because I didn't really go to drag shows in LA, which is crazy, but true. So I think it was mainly just meeting the queens of New Orleans, the queens, kings, just like drag performers of New Orleans, and learning about like what a tight-knit community it was. And also the drag there is really unique and gritty and punk and unusual. And I didn't necessarily see myself reflected in drag, and I think that's a part of why I didn't get into it. But the drag in New Orleans is so fun, and I finally saw myself reflected in this art expression that I'm drawn to. So that was really exciting to get into, because they do weird stuff. Like, I don't know, you'll see it in the show, but Mingus does some crazy shit in their drag performances, and it's very fun and unexpected.
Let's go to Johnny. Let's talk about Noah. Like I said, flawed and messy, but on the outside, Noah's a lawyer, seems to have it all together. He's got a swanky pad even, but on the inside, there's a lot going on. Tell me a little bit about Noah and, you know, what we can expect, because I think there's a lot going on when it comes to Noah's love life and all of that.
Yeah, Noah, I say, is the cisgender daddy of the group who, like you said, from the outside looks like maybe they have it all together, they got the house, they got the job, but underneath the surface it's just a well of emotion, a well of unhealed trauma. And I think it's so great because we do have so many people in the community and even allies that walk around trying to hold everything together, and you know, it's in the moments where everything falls apart that you really see the true essence of people. So I'm really excited for people to see what Noah does and the decisions that Noah makes, because it all illustrates, you know, back to where he comes from and, you know, his family dynamic and, you know, the relationships he's had even within this group. But Noah's, you know, a little baby in a man's body, which I can relate to.
CG, let's talk about Cher. One of the storylines that I definitely can identify with is this kind of that moment when you're like growing up, but you're like, am I still like the partier? Can I still be wild and amazing? But I'm a grown up and I have responsibilities, and I love that we're gonna get to see that with Cher and Ruthie. Tell me a little bit about getting to tell the story and take on this character.
It's been very fulfilling and overflowing to get to put on Cher, and for Cher to get to put on me. They're a person that is struggling / you know, steadily trying to figure out how to navigate the transition that they're in. Specifically when it comes to, you know, like you were saying, you want to bring these lives into the world. How's your life gonna be affected and elevated by that, but also morphed by that at the same time? And I'm in a very parallel kind of situation as Cher is. not with kids, but just with transitions in general, and figuring out how to, grab onto the steering wheel of that and work the way through it with everything that comes with it.
Absolutely. And I can't tell you how important it is that we see queer people as parents, representation, and I can't wait to see how this storyline all unfolds for the two of you. Last but not least, Ryan. How are you, Ryan? Not only is this about a group of friends, it actually touches on siblings, which I love. Spoiler alert, I guess it's not a spoiler, but Julian and Brody are brothers. Definitely a complicated relationship. Ryan, I'd love for you to kind of explain what is going on between Brody and Julian.
Yeah, like Julian and Brody have history, and there's a lot of unresolved issues. There's a lot of sibling rivalry that I feel like both of them are kind of loath to admit, but really comes bubbling to the surface. It gets complicated, as you'll see. It's definitely a little twisted sister.
Jaclyn, let's go back to you. I think, thinking about the work that we do at GLAAD and how we say it's so important that queer stories are told by queer people. And I know it was so intentional for all of you to really have queer people involved in all parts of this, writers in all parts of creating. Tell me about that and how, it was obviously, I know it was such a priority for you.
It's important to tell honest stories, and representation on its own only takes you so far, especially when that representation is through maybe a cis, white, straight, male, often lens that is not really interested in telling like true stories of, trans people or queer people's lives, but rather telling like sort of, oh no, look, we have a trans person. Oh, look, we have some queer people. And as a result, you end up with these like very flat stories, and you end up with, to be honest, I think representation that feels a little toothless to me. And I think with this show, something that was very important to us was wanting to go beyond that like simply representing our, communities wasn't enough. It's about allowing us to be seen, allowing queer people, trans people to be seen as messy. Creating stories that live in sort of a messy middle is what we wanted to do, and allowing us the dignity of what, to be honest, like straight white guys and other groups are starting to get to see all the time.
I think one of my favorite moments in the writer's room was actually when our writer's assistant, Alyssa Taylor, came out to the room as straight, which was just like, yes, it was like incredibly charming. It was a very sweet moment. But then like after we finished that day, I just like stepped back, and it really hit me like, I think this is the first work environment I've ever been in that was really, really queer. It made us realize that like this is a really special environment, and we are really we're making a show that I think can only be told from this community. And I'm really proud of like this like team of Avengers that we've assembled, both like in the writing room and in our cast, because the show itself, I think, the queerness of the show is like baked into its DNA. It's in every fiber of its creation.
It's important to talk about that the series definitely does focus on tragedy. And I think from the get-go, we see that there's a storyline that is definitely inspired by the Pulse nightclub shooting tragedy that happened, in real life. And I know you all worked closely with some of the Pulse survivors. Tell me why it was important for you to kind of go that route when creating this series.
Yeah, of course. I mean, first of all, the events in our show are fictional, and although they are heavily inspired by the events that happened in Orlando at the Pulse nightclub shooting, which really was specifically targeting the queer Latinx community. I traveled to Orlando after getting the rights from Russell, who saw this as the way to expand upon the legacy of the show. And I met with the survivors. Thanks to Joel Morales and the Orlando United Assistance Center, I set up roundtables and individual interviews to really understand not just that night, but who they were before and who they were after. and the way in which that night impacted them in the long term, not just like, our show doesn't center, it's not a show about a shooting. It's a show about the rebuilding of a community. And it's specifically about how a community rebuilds in the wake of a tragedy like this to create a bigger, better, safer space that's more inclusive than the one before it. And that's what I saw in Orlando, what I learned from those survivors. And so we engaged with the survivors, and we continued to hire those who were interested as consultants on the show to make sure that we were really getting the story right, that we were doing it justice.
Queer joy doesn't exist in a world without trauma. Like, to be queer, to be trans in America in 2022 is to face trauma a lot. And it's from that trauma that queer joy always comes from, because that's what queerness is. It's a defiance of trauma. It's defiance of a world that doesn't always want you there. And I think specifically the idea of like, this is a story about a community coming together and finding queer joy.
Devin, coming back to you, one of the other parts that is so central in the other themes is family. And I think, we touched on it a little bit about, your character and his brother. But tell me a bit about how this show really focuses on telling important family stories, whether it be the family you were born into or, your chosen family, obviously, which is so something that the queer people understand and really need.
Like learning how to both like choose and be chosen simultaneously that creates family, right? So you said the family that we choose. So I think what's cool about the show is we get to see people choose their family, but also learn how to be chosen by family. And that comes back to safety. It comes back to trust. It comes back to feeling, Jaclyn spoke about trauma earlier, and it's true, like queerness really does spout from trauma, but there are beautiful things that come from places that have been destroyed, fires, when massive fires happen, the land that is created underneath the fire is richer than it could possibly be. And I love the fact that our show isn't about trauma, but it is about the richness that happens in the land after the trauma existed. And that for me is family.
You better preach.
I know,
preach.
so...
My goodness. Where did she come from?
No, so beautifully said. And I couldn't agree more. Jesse, if I can come back to you, while we're talking about family, I think it is, we touched on it a little bit earlier, but to see a trans character become a mother right away and to see just this storyline, I would imagine has got to be so important and impactful for you. I mean, what was it like to get to play a mom and to, be this very interesting, messy character, not having all the answers, but, trying to do the best that you can?
Yeah, it was really cool to play a parent who is not on the same side, is not on the same page as her co-parent. Ruthie's descent into motherhood is a really clumsy one. It's, for me personally as a trans woman, I found like doing these scenes with these babies really affirming and really fun and really special and sweet. And getting notes like "be less motherly" was actually a challenge, and like getting to play Ruthie's journey into accepting her role in motherhood was so special and so unique, and not the type of stories I think trans people are used to seeing about themselves reflected on TV.
Finn, let's come back to you. Your character is 17, very young, and I was thinking as we were sitting here, there's just such an opportunity for young people especially to see this show and to just really feel seen and represented. What's your hope for, the queer youth that watch this show? What do you want them to take away from it?
I think Mingus's storyline almost acts in parallel to what it could be for a young queer person watching the show. I mean, you see Mingus so self-actualized and so open in their queerness at the beginning of the show, and they are that central queerness in their community, in their like high school community. That's the sense that you get. Like they're probably the most queer person in their friend group, in their immediate environment. And so you get to watch them discover the queer scene and discover a new queer community. It's something that I wish I could have seen as a young queer person. It probably would have helped me along my journey of discovering my own gender, discovering my own sexuality, but you get to see a microcosm of that in Mingus's storyline and see how they integrate into this flourishing queer community after, you know, in this case, a tragedy. And it's a really beautiful coming of age moment.
CG, if I can come to you, you know, thinking about that, what do you think it would have meant to you to have had this show when you were a younger person coming up and figuring out everything? You know, what would it have meant to you to have this version of Queer as Folk then?
Being able to see so many different versions of one person at one time is a lot to take in, especially in a world where it's like you are this thing, not these other things, so try and stay here and be that thing. It would have brought a lot of comfort.
I definitely want to talk about the backdrop of the series, New Orleans. I don't think a lot of people really understand how queer New Orleans is. What was it like to kind of, get to shoot there, but also just to be a part of highlighting what being queer in New Orleans is all about?
New Orleans is like, and always has been, kind of the queer mecca of the South in the United States. So it's so nice to see, you know, we've seen shows based in San Francisco, Los Angeles, New York. So it's really great to come home to New Orleans and highlight how diverse and how colorful and exciting that the queer scene is. Like you see it in the drag community, and even in the way that we were received when we went to New Orleans was so warm. That Southern hospitality was super important. But it's also so great to highlight a city that doesn't always get its due when it comes to, you know, even the very fabric of what people are like, whether they are queer or otherwise. And I think it's just one of those things that people will watch and be like, I need to go to New Orleans. I need to experience this feeling. And, you know, one of my favorite parts of watching the series is the beginning, where you first see the city and you get the drone shots and the people dancing. And it just, I have goosebumps thinking about it now, because it really does illustrate how special the community is there. And I'm really, really happy that, that Stephen chose that this would be the palette for these stories.
Ryan, if I may come back to you, thinking about Special, which you know I loved so much, you definitely are no stranger to some sexier scenes. Specifically, there's an episode, I think it's episode 4, that's called Fuck Disabled People, which talks about disabled sex parties. And I would love for you just to talk more about that, because I think, again, for representation, you know what? It's important that we see this.
So rarely do people give a shit about disabled people. So the fact that Steven has always made that a part of the show, and not only with just me, but someone else, it was really, really exciting to show disabled people as sexual beings that like truly just want to fuck and have fun. It was really, really incredible to put a spotlight on queer disabled joy.
This has been such an amazing conversation. So excited to chat with all of you. Stephen, Jaclyn, any last thoughts or anything you'd like to get in there before we wrap up?
We are so grateful for the opportunity to talk about the show. And to be able to also like share this with our cast and be all together. It's, this is the first time we've been together now since production, and it fills my heart with joy a little bit to see all your faces.
I know, I was just thinking the same thing. Seeing you all even in a virtual room is like so delightful. It's such an honor to tell these stories and to tell them with these people. Is like, it has been such a joy, and I'm excited for everybody else to fall as madly in love with them as I know Stephen and I have.
I definitely fell in love with all of you, and I can't wait for the rest of the world to see it. Just a reminder that Queer as Folk will be available June 9th on Peacock.